El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo. What's up, guys? As people in the United States and the world race against police brutality after the assassination of George Floyd, I started thinking of stories of resistance and protest in Latin America. Today, I'm gonna look at some of the interesting ways Latin Americans have found to protest. I have to start with the most obvious characteristic that is very unique to Latin American protest: el cacerolazo. Cacerola is Spanish for pot, and when you add aso at the end of the word, it means that you're hitting that something. So cacerolazo literally means hitting of the pot. Hitting pots and pans is one of the most common forms of protest in Latin America. The loud sound of metal hitting metal was a sign of discontent towards the government and sometimes a sign of hunger. The tradition started in France in the 1800s. However, in Latin America it started in Chile, and you will see that a lot of these protests and all of these protest practices actually started in Chile. It actually started when Chileans started protesting against food shortages that were happening during the presidency of Salvador Allende. But then they became widespread against the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, who was actually responsible for the fall of President Allende. Americans, how do you feel about bringing cacerolas to our protest? I think this would add a lot to the demonstrations that are going on right now. A second characteristic of Latin American protest is the important connection that protest has to music. Music is at the heart of every protest. In Latin America during the 60s and 70s, there was a whole genre of music called canción protesta, songs of protest. It included people like Víctor Jara from Chile, who was actually killed by the Pinochet dictatorship for his connections to the Communist Party. People like Mercedes Sosa from Argentina, who was exiled. People like Ana y Jaime from Colombia, and the list goes on and on. Our parents always made sure that we were listening to these songs, that we learned about the struggles that were going on in Latin America before our time. And then I have to say that there were also a lot of protest songs during my generation. I think of Molotov from Mexico, who criticized the structures of inequality in Mexico. And even today, I see a great resurgence of Latin American song protest. Puerto Rico is a big example of this happening. In the summer of 2019, there were big protests against corruption in Puerto Rico. And some of the most prominent voices during the protests were the voices of artists. I think of Ñejo Flow, Ricky Martin, Bad Bunny, and Residente. In fact, Residente and Bad Bunny came out with a song called Desahogo, which roughly translates to when you release everything that is inside of you and you no longer feel like you're choking. I would argue that Residente has done canción protesta, protest songs, for a long time. In fact, I think of the song Latin America, which is a song of Latin American unity and identity against American imperialism. I think of this song as one of the top exponents of canción protesta. Music flows through the veins of an uprising. As Salvador Allende said, there is no revolution without songs. The last point is that, in my opinion, protests happen all the time in Latin America and they are part of everyday conversations. I used to go to public university in Colombia, La Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and I guarantee you there was no semester that we didn't cancel classes because of a student strike or major demonstrations happening. I feel that our countries have faced so much that people are talking about politics and what's going on and the transformation that needs to happen all the time, or at least that's how it was in my family and with my group of friends. That was the conversation topic all the time: politics, what's going on, the situations, resistance. Last year there were some big series of protests that some people call the Latin American Spring. They happen in Bolivia, Colombia, Mexico, Puerto Rico, all over the place. They were some of the biggest protests that Latin America has seen in the last 20 years, but I guarantee you, they haven't been the only ones. Protests in Latin America are often creative. Take the Chilean feminist dance that made it all the way to Europe. Protests in Latin America, like in the US, They are at the heart of our culture. Before I leave, it is important to point out that racism and police brutality also occur in Latin America. That's why I would like to invite Latinos to have conversations about racism, like the world is having right now. Our countries are definitely affected by this issue. Before you go, I would like to invite all of you to use your voices and to put your money where your mouth is. I would like to invite you to donate to the ACLU. The American Civil Liberties Union is always at the forefront of the fight for our rights, and in this time in particular of the rights of African Americans. Let us know in the comments what are some other characteristics of protest from your country. How do people express their opinions in the streets? I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to give us a like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos about Latin American culture and Spanish language.